Here we are today with Dr. Linda Metcalf, and my first question for you is, how would you like to be introduced?
Interesting question. I think I'd like to be introduced as somebody who helps other people bring out the best in their students and in their clients. That's how I'd like to be introduced. I think I've been a school counselor, I've been a middle school teacher, but the thing that I'm the proudest of is, well, of course, my children. A mother of three children, all grown up, married 47 years to the same person. To think that maybe there's some children out there, teenagers out there today who are being talked to by a school counselor or a teacher and are feeling better about themselves, it's all I want.
Why solution-focused brief therapy?
Because it works, because it's honoring, because it's respectful, because it's client generated in regards to solutions. And I like that. I like the idea of people coming in and figuring out with my assistance and asking questions what they need to do.
Do you use solution-focused thinking in your own life?
I do. I really do. Yeah, I mean, I can't, it's you would rarely see me saying, "Oh, that's terrible. Oh, that's terrible." You'd probably see me thinking, "Well, this is a real short story to answer your question, but our youngest son was at college and we got a notice he was failing one class. So I go and do the parent thing and call him up and say, "Hey, Ryan, got this notice." But then I said to him, "But you know what? You're taking five courses, you're passing the other four." And I said, as I was calling you up thinking I might want to say something about this course, I thought, how's he passing those other four? So can we talk about that for a minute? And we did. And I said, I believe in you. I think you can pass that fifth course. See what you can do. I mean, truly, and he did. He ended up passing it. Yeah. So it just kind of does make sense. It does.
Everyone brings previous experiences into what they do. Did you have one theoretical approach prior to solution-focused brief therapy, and how did it influence your use of solution-focused talk?
I'll go back a little bit. 1991, I was a grad student in my PhD program, and my teacher came in one day and he said, two books just came out that I'm really fascinated with. One was In Search of Solutions by Bill O'Hanlon, and the other one was Narrative Means to Therapeutic Ends by White and Epstein. And he said, both are just so different, everyone. And so I was practicing to be a strategic family therapist. And was a little confused by the work of strategic family therapy. It was very complicated in that it was very directive, and I was responsible as a therapist to make change happen with families. So I was coming back in that kind of state of mind. It really didn't fit my personality, and so when I met Solution Focused, I was like, "Huh, now this makes more sense to me." And the first time I used it on a family, I was sold, and I remember the day. That's all I'm going to do.
What fields beyond counseling do you feel best align with solution-focused thinking?
I think education is a natural for it. I know it has been taken into business, into companies, and it's been taken into in coaching. Many people do coaching and solution focused work, and but I think education is where it truly does align well, because what do we do in education? We try to get kids to perform and be successful. And it seems to be a natural for schools. And that's why I started doing that in the early 90s, because I was seeing a real need for kids to feel competent in something versus being told what was wrong with them, which was happening a lot, and told how to learn. And it wasn't working. So I think education does well. I actually worked with an internal medicine doctor who used it in his practice. He was working with elderly people and was getting very depressed. And so that's why he came to me, and we talked one day, and he said, "These questions you asked me, what kind of questions are these?" And I said, "Well, they're called solution focused therapy questions." And he said, "Can I get a book on this?" And so I encouraged him to get O'Hanlon's book, and he read In Search of Solutions. And pretty soon he was feeling better, because the way he was talking to his patients, he would an elderly woman would come in, for example, and say, "Well, Dr. Smith, I just barely made it here today. It's just been so hard for me to get here." And he would hear all those complaints, and he started saying, "But you made it. How did you make it?" Or another patient would say, I took my pills most of the time last week, but I should have taken them all. And he said, but how did you take them on those days when you did? And that to him stopped a lot of the complaining, and he started feeling better, and the depression lifted because he was feeling like he was getting someplace. John Walter, in his book Becoming Solution Focused, wrote about a baseball coach who saw a player one day who was watching films of himself up at bat, and he was striking out, not doing well, and he went to watch himself on the films, and he was watching all the films where he was striking out, and the coach came by and said, why are you watching those films? And the player said, well, I want to see why I'm striking out. He said, watch the films where you hit the ball. I mean, there are so many applications to this model, and it's not for everyone, but I certainly see the joy in working with it. So I think there's many applications to it.
Were there any moments when you felt solution-focused brief therapy wasn't working for you?
No, I really can't. Once I started embracing it, if it wasn't working, it was something I was doing. I always felt that way. I never blamed the client. No, I mean, and my job was to figure out how to apply it. And I think, if anything, that's when I began to dabble in narrative therapy, combining it with narrative therapy. That truly opened a whole new way of working with people when I did that. People who were traumatized or who had had a death in the family, and it was those were tricky, but I wouldn't say it didn't work for me. It was up to me to use the questions in a way that worked for the client.
You mentioned learning so much from Bill's book, and
Uh,
but that obviously wasn't your endpoint for training. What did you do to train yourself?
I read everything I could, and I pretty much focused on case studies. Because when you read case studies, you see how the questions are asked. And I remember early on, coming from that strategic background, I really wanted to hone in on how does this work. And I'm a teacher too, so step by step always worked for me. And so I would go through case studies and begin to see what's the trend here. How do we do this? How's it going? And then I would keep it in front of me, probably for a couple of years. Whenever I would see clients, I'd make copies of the template I created and keep it in front of me. And that plus, I listened to Bill O'Hanlon a lot. I listened to Michael Durant's work a lot. I watched as many videos as I could to kind of figure out what people were doing. And to me, in my head, it had to become a process. When I started working and taking students over to brief therapy practice, that was really fascinating because I'd been doing it for a while, and then I learned from them too, additional ways. So I'm very grateful to have met them. It's just, keeping your eyes and ears open for the way people apply it, and noticing that after a while, you see how the process works, and when and how to ask questions and persist.
And your questioning is wonderful. Your sequencing is unconventional. How did you come up with your sequencing? Is it just from the case studies?
In regard to like best hopes, preferred future, and exceptions, you know, when I look, I think because I teach so many school counselors and teachers, and knowing the pressure they're under and the time constraints they're under, what I know about educators is that it's got to be simple. It's got to be, you've got to see a path. And so I tried to simplify it as much as I could so that it would be easier to teach them and also easier for them to follow. Originally, I had a sequence of like 6 different steps, and that was okay, but you could easily get lost. So that's, and I mean, the sequence that I've got is best hopes and preferred future and exceptions, but they're all interchangeable. I mean, exceptions can go after best hopes. You can do either way. It doesn't matter. What's important is that you follow the client. But best hopes, that's number one. You got to have best hopes. You got to know where you're going in that taxi cab, according to Chris Iveson. I believe that, or else you'll never get to your destination. But what you do after you get your best hopes is just, together with the client, You can talk about exceptions, you could talk about preferred future, but you've got to have best hopes and you've got to have preferred future at the end of the day so that they know what they're going to be doing when they step out of your office. So yeah, that's one reason I try to keep it simple.
If you had to come up with an advertising campaign for solution focused brief therapy, what would your slogan be?
If you'd like to work less and accomplish more with your students, this model is for you.
Ah, very nice. You've given a lot of these interviews. What am I missing? Is there anything you'd like to add?
I just think there's such a need for this in education, Joe. I really do. And so that's why people like yourself are so important where you are in the world to do this. And I just think in education we're missing the boat so often, and our poor teachers are just so stressed. There's so much that I wish I could do more of. And just this morning, I was thinking about some teachers that we were reading the paper, and there were some things that were said to teachers that were so cruel. And I thought, these poor people get up every morning and try their best to go out and give students an education, and students don't always appreciate them the way they need to be appreciated. And our teachers not being trained in mental health or not being trained in knowing what else to do, when kids are disrespectful, often maybe do things that they regret later. And I think that's why, that's really kind of my purpose at this point in my life is to find a way to get the message out that this can make a difference for you as a teacher. And it's not an easy task because a lot of educators are, they're frustrated. And when I even begin to suggest the idea that instead of looking at this kid as a disrespectful kid who throws the chair across the room, can we begin to look at him as a person who came to school and put his feet on the floor in front of you, which means that he wants something from you. It's a hard mindset to sell, but for those who can do it, the results are incredible. That's what I would like to say, that solution focus truly does hold new opportunities for teachers to feel successful with kids. And also, when teachers feel successful with the kids do well. It's a systemic thing, So that's what I would say about it. So hope that makes sense to you.
Oh, makes perfect sense to me.
And there's many, many, many schools to touch and provide the ideas to. It's finding a way in that is the most difficult.
And well, actually, that's right there. That's a beautiful question in itself. What is the best way in? Because it seems like educators, counselors, everybody just keeps reinventing the same wheel rather than looking outside the box and finding a hopeful approach. Like, what would be your best packaging for universities? Because really, whatever they teach is really what eventually a generation down the road is really what's.
Right, right. Well, I mean, all you need to do, at least in the US, is look at the statistics of the dropout rate we have in the US. It is terrible. And because of kids that are just, they get to a certain point in their school year, that in their high school years, where they just sometimes they're just not performing there, and they come from tough situations. There's race, there's discrimination, there's marginalized communities in the US that are not being attended to like they need to be attended to. And as a result, they're getting pushed back and they drop out. So, one of the things that I try to do whenever a school calls me to do a training, or somebody suggests I do a training for a school, is to say to them, what are your best hopes for your school? If you were to imagine a time when your school is performing better, what would be going on? And I listened to them, and from their answer, I said, well, what if I had an idea for you that I could begin to share with your teachers and your counselors and your administrators? Would that be of interest to you? You have to get them interested first and get them get some buy-in. The hardest thing that I do and I've trained a lot of school districts, is when I go in and they just say, go train the school counselors. And here you train school counselors, and they get the ideas and they go out and they try. But it's like all uphill for them, because they're going to get pushback from teachers who are going, what do you mean you want me to watch when things go well? This kid's a wreck, or administrator. Well, what about policy? I've got to expel him. So the ideal thing to do is in university setting would be to teach future principals, future school counselors, and future teachers a solution focused approach. I mean, that would be a dream. It's funny. I've offered that at my own university. I'll come teach your classroom management class, and they haven't asked yet. There's a mindset of this is what we've always done, therefore this is the way we need to continue to do it. Um, yes, but there are those wonderful school districts who say, we see the magic in this. Let's do this. And I'm working with one right now in Houston that is, and the differences they're making and seeing is huge. So I mean, it's got to be self-fulfilling for anyone to adopt a new approach. And so to go into a school and say, okay, people, you've done it wrong for 30 years. I'm going to show you how to do it right would be ridiculous. And they should throw tomatoes at me. So instead, we go in and I ask them first thing, what are your best hopes for the next few weeks of school? And whatever they tell me first, or we'll go. I'll write it all down and validate it all, and then I might say, so as a result of this is what you want. What can I talk about today that would make things begin to go that direction? So it's always led by the audience, always led by the teachers. And then once we do that, that seems to get them to where they don't read their computers the whole time I'm teaching them. At least that's what happens. And then there's got to be follow up. There has to be follow up. You cannot just go one time a semester and say, okay, it's got to be once a month. And I do that with this one school district in Houston. When we started, once a month, I'd do a Zoom with them. And we'd start off with successes. What are you doing well? And a lot of questions would be asked. And people began to really grasp the ideas. And the successes started to grow. But it's consistency, and it's a commitment by a district or a school to say, we want this. And then, my job is to help them find ways to keep it to where they are held accountable of doing those things. And that's what I'm always thinking about. How can we do that? So
Thank you so much for giving me your time. I know you're a busy, busy, busy person, and I really do appreciate you taking a little block out to spend some time with me.